This is somewhat a sequel to the previous video I have done called Dragon Age Veilguard Character Designs Are Amazing, where I discussed the character designs of Veilguard companions and talked about why they are great. And that is what I want to do with this video as well. Note, you don't have to watch that video to get this one. So, let's begin. To start off, what makes good architecture design in media broadly? The first and foremost thing to consider is intention. What is it trying to convey by the architecture? You can see this as a huge influence on why most architecture looks the way it does. Cathedrals have so much space inside them, not because it's necessary to house many people, but to give a sense of grandeur and the divine, to show off the power of the church and God. This is why they are like that. The size, the shape, the colors all come together to invoke that feeling, what it must have felt like for a peasant to walk inside those halls. To use a Dragon Age example, if the intention was to be grounded and real, you'll get something like Ferelden architecture, because if it is to demonstrate wealth and opulence, then it would look like Orlais architecture. Ferelden architecture looks the way it does because it isn't trying to be a grand thing. It's simple, it's enough, and that's all it has to be. But an important thing to consider is how does the architecture reflect its people, and more specifically who built or commissions the architecture to be built. Now this can come from architecture first or people first mentality, meaning that the architecture can be designed and then the people fill in those spaces are then written, or the people can be written and then the architecture is reformed by those people. In Dragon Age, who the people or group are inform the architecture of the place or nation. We usually get a description of the people, then we get shown the architecture. The people in Orlais are divided into roughly two groups. It's more complicated than that, I know, it's just me trying to be a bit simple for this. The nobles who wish to flaunt their wealth and power, this is reflected in how their buildings look grand, spacious, using bold colors and having heavy symmetry. Symmetry is relevant here because accomplishing symmetry is a hard task to do, and can be accomplished with only great skill or wealth. Common people, though, don't have such wealth, so their buildings are far simpler. They lack the bold colors and symmetry, and this doesn't just make the architecture look good, but it tells a story as well. With that out of the way, let us explore the 6 main locations Veilguard is taking place in. Tevinter, Arlathan Forest, the Anderfels, Navara, Antiva, and Rivain. So what is Tevinter's architecture trying to accomplish? Well, it is trying to invoke the ideas of domination and tyranny. So how does it try to accomplish that? Well, it accomplishes that by having the architecture larger than the people themselves. Minrathous is the largest city in Thedas, in both height of its buildings and how far the city stretches. Architecture that is far, far bigger than the people living in it invokes a feeling of being surrounded on all sides. The streets are wide, but it somehow makes the feeling of claustrophobia even more intense. The spaces and sizes are so overwhelming that you can't help but feel a little bit small next to it. Minrathous doesn't need to be this big to house all of its inhabitants, but it's the way it is to show off the power and domination. Tevinter is a society ruled by mages, and they want to be seen as larger than life. Most mages live in spires that are taller than most buildings. The effect is that the elite look down upon the poor, and the poor look up to the elite. The colors also contribute to this as well. Blacks and golds have always been associated with evil empires, and this is an effective way to show that. It demonstrates very well the ideas of domination and tyranny. So what is Arlathan Forest trying to accomplish? Well, it is trying to show how advanced the ancient elves were with their magic and to invoke a feeling of loss. And how does it do that with its architecture? Well, the obvious is the ruins dot all over the place. But those ruins still hold some grandeur, some presence. They are impossibly large, just like Minrathous architecture, but it is all crumbling in some way, a hazy glimpse into what could have been. But it is all collapsed and being overgrown with flora. The sense of loss is strong. What amplifies this loss as well is the ancient magic we see. It is doing things we have not seen in Dragon Age. Floating structures, constructing buildings from nowhere, and many more things. The old Elven Empire used to have magic that could have done wonderful and terrible things, but now it is lost. Other details I wish to point out is that the color of the architecture. White has always been seen as a pure or morally good color. Now this isn't me saying that the Elven Empire was good, far from it. What I'm saying is that it is to contrast what the Elven Empire actually was, and to indicate that while it was in many ways evil, it was also wonderful. This is what Solus feels so much sadness about. Not the rulers, but the good that was done within it. Another point is the color of the forest is similar to the Fade, telling us a subtle hint that the forest has a deep connection to the Fade. I'm not saying that the Fade influenced its color, but simply saying it's a subtle nod to the area having a connection to the Fade. The Anderfels is a desolate place of contrast. It has many ruins dotting the land, but also grand fortresses and architecture. In Dragon Age lore, the Anderfels has always been described as a desolate place. So desolate that if someone dies there, their body would not decompose properly, for no bugs or grubs could reach them. And it is shown wonderfully here. The dark browns and greys give off a doomy vibe. This place faced 2 blights and clearly never recovered. But within this desolation rises grand buildings and religious devotion. The Grey Warden buildings look massive and strong. Weisshaupt has been described in lore as a massive fortress, and it shows. It looks like it has layers and layers to it. It isn't just a fortress, it nearly looks like the size of a city, which makes sense because it houses more Grey Wardens than any nation in Thedas. But it tells us that the Wardens must have a lot of political power to get this constructed. Other nations would feel threatened by the number of Grey Wardens and the amount of space they take up. But the Wardens are revered in the Anderfels. Alongside the Grey Warden buildings are numerous monuments to Andraste, with the largest being a white statue of Andraste near Weisshaupt. What the architecture of the Anderfels tells us is that this is a cruel and desolate place filled with the kind of people who inhabit it, strong, cold, and distant, whose only form of light is through religious devotion to Andraste. Since this video is being made before Veilguard comes out, it is subject to the fact that we haven't seen much of Navara. All we really have seen is the Grand Necropolis, so we are going to focus on that. What is the Grand Necropolis trying to accomplish? Well, it is trying to evoke the feelings of a grand mausoleum for spirits to inhabit the dead. And how well does it do that? Well, it does that by taking inspirations from Egyptian architecture. Egypt was more than its dead, but in the minds of many it is remembered for its grand tombs. It serves as an effective shorthand to invoke the feeling of a grand mausoleum, but the other way to accomplish this feeling is the size of it. In the lore, the Grand Necropolis is nearly the size of the city. Why it is like that is because in Navara, when people die, they don't get burned into ashes, but get mummified and their bodies inhabited by a spirit of the Fade. For it is their belief that when a soul enters the Fade, it displaces a spirit, so they invite them to bring balance. Not everyone in Navara gets entombed into the necropolis, but many are, and this causes the mausoleum to be massive, not just in width, but goes deep inside the earth as well. Other details to mention are the many dead iconography surrounding it. The large skeletal statues that dot the mausoleums sell the tomb of the dead idea quite well. Another detail is the hazy green mist persistent in the necropolis, which indicates that the veil in the necropolis is thin. All of this contributes to the feeling of a grand tomb for the living dead. What is Antiva's architecture trying to accomplish? This is something I've been rewriting over and over again because it seems like Antiva's architecture doesn't necessarily have a point to it, but I think this is the point. It is trying to look beautiful. This doesn't have to be complex or deep, but sometimes the architecture is just simply that. Antiva is inspired by Italian and Spanish architecture, and oftentimes the purpose of it was simply to look beautiful. It wasn't to demonstrate dominance or control, it was simply to be something everyone can marvel at, which can serve a bit of a purpose in telling us that the crows aren't interested in flaunting their power, unlike Tevinter. The only other things I can note is that although the colors used in Treviso has purple hints to it, which in Dragon Age lore has always been associated with pride and desire, which makes sense for Antiva. They are a very prideful nation, and many of them of all sorts of desires. Other notes are that Treviso allows for more vertical travel. What I mean by that is that Treviso seemingly has many ways to get to one location. You have roofs, streets, alleyways, or a combination of all three. Treviso seems like a hive, which can contribute to the fact that it gives assassins a lot more options. Whether this is the reason for it to look like that, I don't know. Antiva is not complex on its surface level. It has a wildly different political system to many of the nations on Thedas, but on the surface level, all they really care about is seemingly beauty. Rivain, much like Navara, hasn't been shown off much. All we really know is that we're going to the coast, but from that we have seen it looks quite beautiful, but also lacks any real architecture of note. But that isn't a bad thing. It tells a story of its own. The lack of something can just mean as much as the presence of something. Why Rivain has little architecture and what architecture we have seems to be in ruins is because Rivain has been a place where many wars have happened. From the first invasion of the Qunari, which has caused a massive cultural shift, to the many exalted marches against the people who refused to worship the Maker, due to the prior cultural shift and the prior culture to that. This caused the nation to be unstable, and whatever that was there to be destroyed. In lore, Rivain is described as a non-traditional nation. It has a monarch, but it's mostly governed by wise women and seers being mages. This sort of decentralized society leaves the nation without a lot of cohesion. You can't really gather enough power to build the kind of cities we see in Tevinter or Treviso. Not saying that Rivain has no cities, it does, but the cities are far less important than other nations' cities. We can see from what settlements we have images for, and they are simple. There isn't much to them at all, and that is because, again, due to their history. There isn't much to say else. Sometimes the lack of architecture is just as important as the presence of it, because it is still being used to tell a story. Dragon Age Veilguard's architecture tells a story about the world and the people who are in it, and that is something amazing. We get to see a lot more, and more importantly, feel what these people are feeling. It is really well integrated into the world. I wanted to make this video because I really enjoyed the architecture of Veilguard, and just it's cool because one of my favorite parts of any fantasy is always seeing how cities are constructed, what they look like, how they look like, why they look like, and the people who inhabit them. It informs a lot about the story, but also just looks really cool and sometimes just looks really pretty. And that's what I really wanted to just describe to you all. Why these, architecture, these buildings, these designs are pretty amazing. So yeah, if you like the video, perhaps consider subscribing. And if you like it, maybe also like it. And also comment down your thoughts below. What do you think of Veilguard's architecture? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Please tell me down below.